There was a time, not too long ago in the grand scheme of things, when the school bell ringing at the end of the day wasn't just a signal that the lessons were over, it was an invitation. An invitation is something wild and open and entirely unsupervised. A time when the final clang of the bell sent a ripple of energy through the classroom, and without a moment's hesitation, we'd spring from our desks, not to go home and stare at a glowing screen, not to rush to structured after-school programs, not to disappear behind closed doors, but to step directly into the soft, golden arms of the afternoon. Back then, childhood wasn't something managed or scheduled or swaddled in caution, it was something we lived, raw and unfiltered. You'd throw your book bag onto the couch, maybe kick off your shoes if you remembered, and before your mother could even ask where you were going, the front door would slam shut behind you as you sprinted outside, still in your school clothes, heart pounding with the thrill of unspoken freedom. The sidewalks became your highways, the yards your arenas, the alleyways and open lots your wilderness. You didn't ask permission. You didn't have to text anyone. There were no GPS trackers beeping in someone's pocket. The world, or at least your little slice of it, was yours. All yours. And it buzzed with possibility. There were bikes tossed into grass like discarded toys, their wheels still spinning. There were jump ropes snapping like drum beats against concrete. There was laughter, wild, loose, uncontained, echoing off brick walls and front porches. And all of it unfolded beneath a sky that turned slowly from blue to gold to purple, with the kind of patient grace only a childhood afternoon could hold. That time between the last school bell and the flicker of the streetlights was sacred. It was ours. And in those few, fleeting hours of freedom, we didn't just play, we became. Before we go any further, if this brings back the warmth of those long-lost afternoons and the echo of laughter on your childhood street, take a moment to like this video, subscribe for more slow, heartfelt journeys into the past, and tap the bell so you never miss another memory. Playing outside until dark wasn't simply something we did, it was who we were. It was the very fabric of our childhood, the heartbeat of our after-school hours, and the rhythm that carried us from one season to the next without ever needing a calendar. We didn't see it as an activity or an event. It was life. The neighborhood itself felt alive in a way that's hard to describe now, like it was breathing alongside us, pulsing with our footsteps and our laughter and the endless stories we created out of nothing. The sidewalk wasn't just pavement, it was the slate for hopscotch dreams and chalk masterpieces that melted away with the rain. The grass of every front lawn doubled as an outfield in an invisible baseball game, where bases were sometimes rocks, sometimes a crack in the concrete, and sometimes just a shouted agreement. Trees weren't just part of the landscape, they were towers, fortresses, pirate ships, and hideouts for secret missions we never bothered to explain to anyone else. We didn't need anything special to create whole worlds, just each other, a handful of sticks, a little stretch of dirt, and that beautiful, limitless ingredient called imagination. We built forts from cardboard boxes, pulled wagons like chariots, and turned old refrigerator crates into rocket ships bound for the moon. Everything we touched transformed, because we believed it could. Every telephone pole became a landmark, every crack in the sidewalk a challenge to jump over, and every fence a dare to climb. And in that space, without coaches or instructors or chaperones, we learned how to navigate the world with nothing but our wits and our will. We negotiated rules for tag, changed them halfway through, and argued passionately when someone bent them, but somehow always found our way back to the game. There was an unspoken code among neighborhood kids, a shared understanding that until the sun tucked itself behind the rooftops, the world was wide open, and it belonged to us. Back then, we didn't look to the ticking of the clock to tell us what came next, we looked up. We listened. We felt. Time wasn't measured in half-hour blocks or managed by alarms vibrating in pockets. It moved more gently, more naturally, and with far more magic. The angle of sunlight across a driveway was enough to tell us we had time for one more round of kickball. The longer shadows stretching across lawns hinted that the end was near, but not quite yet. And then, when the first street light buzzed softly to life, flickering like an old friend waking up from a nap, every kid in the neighborhood instinctively knew, this is it. The day's last chapter had begun. It was an unspoken agreement we all honored. No one told us we had to go home just yet, but we started winding things down, knowing in our hearts that the kingdom we'd ruled since school let out was slowly dimming into memory. You could feel it, the way the air cooled, the way the wind whispered through the trees just a little softer, and the way every sound seemed to echo more deeply in the coming dusk. Some of us would squeeze out one last race to the end of the block, or make one final attempt at a handstand in the yard, or try to convince a friend to come out again tomorrow a little earlier. And always, without fail, you could hear it somewhere, off in the distance, someone's mom calling a name into the fading light. Sometimes it was your name. Sometimes it was your friend's. And sometimes you didn't even recognize the voice, but it didn't matter, it was the signal. It was the curtain call for that magical, unsupervised symphony of joy we called an afternoon. The walk home wasn't rushed. We dragged our feet a little, kicked a stray stone along the way, maybe rode the bike slowly with one hand on the handlebars and the other cradling a scrape on your elbow that you didn't even remember getting. And when you finally stepped inside, hair tousled, clothes wrinkled, hands still sticky from something you ate without a napkin, you didn't feel worn out. You felt alive. Alive in a way that only kids who played hard from bell to dusk could understand. You carried with you the smell of the air, the warmth of the pavement, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the soft hum of stories you'd be too tired to tell at dinner, but would remember for the rest of your life. And it wasn't just about the fun, not really. It was about something deeper, something harder to define, something that slips through the cracks of modern childhood like sunlight through old wooden blinds. It was about the freedom, raw, untamed, and completely ours. Out there, in the open air and the soft chaos of neighborhood afternoons, we weren't just kids playing. We were becoming. Becoming braver, becoming more thoughtful, becoming more human in the truest, messiest sense of the word. With no adults refereeing every moment, no screens offering polished simulations, and no schedules dictating how long we could pretend, we had the space to figure things out on our own. Arguments happened, and sometimes they got loud. But we learned, on our own terms, how to cool down, how to meet halfway, how to say, okay, fine, you be the captain this time. We learned what it meant to lose graciously, or not, and what it felt like to win without gloating. There were no trophies. No likes or clapping emojis. Just the natural ebb and flow of relationships built on imagination, repetition, and trust. And sometimes, yes, we took it too far. We climbed a tree higher than we should have. We dared someone to ride their bike down the hill with no hands. We jumped the fence we were told to stay away from. And sometimes, we got hurt. A twisted ankle. A scraped chin. A torn shirt and a face full of dirt. But even those moments carried their own kind of lesson, the kind that sticks because it has to, not because it was handed down in a lecture. And what's more, it didn't make us fearful. If anything, it made us aware of our limits, aware of our bodies, aware of the real consequences of pushing too far without thinking it through. There was wisdom in those bruises, humility in those bandages, and courage in getting back up again, even with a wobble in your step and a tear on your cheek. That freedom wasn't reckless, it was instructive. It taught us to look out for each other, to make room for the little kid who always showed up late, to pause a game when someone skinned their knee, and to say, let's wait for him, because no one should be left out, not even for a minute. And all of that, every unwritten rule, every act of kindness or courage or conflict resolution, happened without anyone scripting it for us. It happened because we were trusted to figure it out. Because we were allowed to live outside the box, both literally and figuratively. And in that beautiful, unpredictable, real-world playground, we learned lessons that no classroom, no curriculum, no algorithm could ever replicate. Some of the very best friendships we ever knew, the kind that still sit quietly in the back corners of our hearts, even after all these years, began not with introductions or invitations, but in the most ordinary of places, the cracked sidewalk in front of someone's house, the dusty path behind the neighborhood church, the patch of grass beneath an old oak tree where the roots stuck out like stairs waiting to be climbed. These were friendships that didn't depend on shared hobbies or mutual acquaintances. They were forged through the simple act of showing up, day after day, in the same spot with the same wide-eyed curiosity and an open heart. You didn't need to know someone's last name, or what their parents did for a living, or whether they had the newest toy or the coolest bike. All that mattered was that they ran when you ran, laughed when you laughed, and didn't flinch when it was their turn to crawl through the culvert or ring the doorbell and run. The bonds we made out there were honest, unfiltered, beautiful in their simplicity. And once you were in, you were in. There was no need to ask, no need to explain. You were part of the gang, part of the team, part of something that mattered. You learned loyalty in the way someone waited for you to tie your shoe. You learned generosity in the way someone shared the last grape popsicle, even though it was their favorite flavor. You learned empathy in the way someone said, "That's okay," when you messed up the play, or when you cried over a scraped elbow. And sometimes, yes, the group shifted. New kids moved in. Others drifted away. But the memories remain like fingerprints on the windows of our childhood, smudged and faint, maybe, but still visible when the light hit just right. Decades may have passed, but even now, if you close your eyes and listen, you can still hear the voices of those long-lost friends. You can hear the laughter that came without warning, without restraint. The inside jokes that no adult would ever understand. The whispered secrets passed like treasure beneath a jungle gym or behind a backyard shed. And if someone mentions their name today, someone you haven't seen since your knees were still scabbed and your shoes were always untied, you'll feel something stir deep inside. A warmth. A smile. A pang of longing. Because those friendships weren't about convenience or proximity. They were about presence. About being there, really there, for the moments that mattered, even if we didn't know how much they'd matter at the time. And even though life moved on, school changed, families moved, time swept us up in the great tide of growing older, those names, those faces, those moments still live inside us. Like stars that only come out when we remember to look up. And every now and then, when the world feels too fast, too polished, too distant, we reach for those memories, not with our hands, but with our hearts, and remember what it felt like to be part of something pure, something real, something that didn't need words to be understood. We remember friendship in its most beautiful form, effortless, spontaneous, and unforgettable. There was a trust that wove itself silently through the fabric of our neighborhoods, an invisible thread that connected houses, backyards, and sidewalks into something greater than the sum of its parts. It was the kind of trust that didn't need to be spoken, because it was simply understood. Parents trusted their children to roam, not because they were careless, but because they believed in the world around them. They believed that the neighbors would glance out the window now and then, that other parents would say something if a situation looked a little off, and most of all, that their kids, us, had enough sense, enough instinct, enough grit to figure things out along the way. There were no GPS trackers, no daily check-ins by text, no apps showing their exact location on a map. There was only the knowledge that, somehow, some way, everything would be okay. Maybe it was the chorus of voices bouncing off the houses that gave them comfort. Maybe it was the sound of bike tires crunching gravel or the telltale thud of a basketball on the driveway. Maybe it was just a deep, almost unshakable faith in the rhythms of childhood, in the belief that scraped knees, minor mischief, and a little bit of trouble now and then were simply part of growing up. And for us kids, that trust was everything. It was a kind of freedom that felt like flying, even if we were only riding a banana seat bicycle down a sloped sidewalk. It made us feel capable, like the world wasn't something to be feared, but something to be discovered. We weren't being watched every second. We weren't being micromanaged or overcorrected. We were being allowed to explore, to experiment, to make decisions and learn from them. And yes, sometimes we made bad ones. Sometimes we stayed out a little too late or wandered a little too far. But even then, the consequences didn't come with fury or fear. They came with a quiet lesson, a talk on the porch, a reminder not to lose the trust we'd been given. That kind of trust, the kind built not on control, but on belief, was formative. It taught us to self-correct, to pause and think before crossing a line, because deep down, we didn't want to lose the freedom we had. We didn't want to be called in early. We didn't want to be the one whose mom suddenly wouldn't let them go past the end of the block. That subtle pressure, rooted not in fear, but in responsibility, shaped us in ways no rulebook ever could. It gave us an early sense of character, of accountability, of understanding that freedom comes with expectations, and that we had to earn it every day. And now, all these years later, when we see a kid glance over their shoulder before doing something risky, or when we feel a pang of nostalgia at the sight of an empty swing set at dusk, we remember that feeling, not just of being young, but of being trusted. Of being given space to grow, stumble, and rise again. And we realize how rare, how precious, and how powerful that was. That trust wasn't just a parenting style, it was a gift. One that still shapes who we are. Evenings, back in those golden days of growing up, had a rhythm that was gentle, familiar, and full of feeling, a kind of slow descent from the wild symphony of daytime into the quieter music of home. It wasn't just a shift in the sky, from blue to amber to dusk, it was a shift in the soul, a turning inward that began almost imperceptibly as the shadows grew longer and the temperature dipped just enough to make you notice. You'd be mid-laugh, maybe in the middle of a chase game or crouched over the beginnings of a dirt fort, when the air would change, just slightly, and with it, something inside you would too. You'd hear it before you saw it, the creak of a screen door as it swung open, the soft voice of a mother calling out into the twilight, maybe a familiar name followed by time to come in. It was never shouted in anger, rarely repeated more than once or twice, but it carried a weight, a finality, that we all understood. That was the first bell of evening. It signaled the closing of the outdoor world, the beginning of that gentle transition from wildness to warmth. Sometimes you'd stall, ask for 5 more minutes, pretend not to hear, beg to finish just one more inning of your made-up game, but deep down, you knew. You knew the day was drawing to a close. And even if you resisted it, part of you welcomed it too. Because what came next was its own kind of comfort. It meant dragging your feet back home, sneakers scuffed, socks half off, maybe a twig in your hair or a smudge of dirt on your cheek you hadn't even noticed. It meant walking into a house that smelled like dinner, where lights glowed softly in the windows and voices floated in from the kitchen. Maybe your dad was home by then, maybe your siblings were already sitting at the table, maybe the news was playing faintly in the background while plates clinked and a dog curled up underfoot. There was something sacred in that homecoming. Something wordless and powerful in the way the world outside gave way to the world within. And though we may not have realized it at the time, that daily return, from the wide-open chaos of childhood adventure to the smaller, steadier rhythm of family life, gave us a deep sense of balance. It told us, again and again, that it was okay to let go of the day. That we could run free, scrape our knees, get dirty, laugh ourselves breathless, and still have a place to land. A place to sit, to be fed, to be seen. And maybe that's one of the greatest gifts those days gave us, the knowledge that no matter how far we wandered, how lost we got in our play or how deep we sank into our imaginations, there was always a door left open, a porch light glowing, a voice that would call us home. That quiet, comforting rhythm, of leaving and returning, of playing and resting, of adventure and refuge, is something many of us still carry today, tucked somewhere deep inside, where memory becomes meaning. It wasn't just the end of a day. It was the soft reminder that we were loved, and that the wild joy of being a child could always find its way back to the steady arms of home. What we didn't fully grasp back then, what we couldn't possibly understand as kids with scabbed knees and tangled hair and the smell of grass still clinging to our clothes, was that those long, ordinary days spent outside were slowly and quietly shaping the kind of people we would grow up to be. Those days weren't just a backdrop for our play, they were our first classroom, our first proving ground, our first taste of the world and our place in it. Without even realizing it, we were learning how to bounce back after a fall, how to make something out of nothing, how to navigate friendships and rivalries, and how to find joy without it being handed to us in a polished box. We didn't need curated experiences or organized entertainment. We didn't need adults to design fun for us, or apps to rate it, or digital trophies to prove we'd done it. We made the fun, shaped it out of mud and imagination, built it from sticks and sidewalk chalk, passed it back and forth like a secret handshake. And because it was ours, unfiltered, unprompted, undirected, it rooted itself deeper than any lecture or textbook ever could. We learned patience by waiting our turn to swing. We learned negotiation by splitting the last piece of candy. We learned perseverance by trying, again and again, to climb that one tree whose branches didn't quite seem low enough. And when we failed, we learned how to laugh it off, how to try a different way, or sometimes how to walk away and come back tomorrow with a better plan. These weren't lessons handed down, they were absorbed, lived, etched into the bones through trial and triumph alike. There are no yearbooks filled with photos of those afternoons. No glossy snapshots of us crawling through bushes or turning a discarded tire into a spaceship. And yet, those images live with us, clearer than almost anything else, preserved not in albums or videos but in the vivid cinema of memory. Because what we gained in those unsupervised hours wasn't meant to be documented, it was meant to be felt. It was about independence, resilience, and a kind of freedom that's hard to explain to anyone who didn't grow up with it. And that's perhaps what we treasure most now, looking back, not just the memories, but what those memories gave us, a foundation of quiet strength, a deep well of creativity, and an enduring sense that joy can be found in the simplest, most unexpected places. So much of who we are was born out there, in the dust, in the sunshine, in the laughter between friends, in the silence after a game ended. And even now, with decades stretched between then and now, those old lessons still hum beneath the surface, gently reminding us of where we came from, and all the wonder that came with it. Now, in the quiet pauses of our modern lives, those rare moments when the phone isn't buzzing, when the television is off, when the world slows down just enough for us to hear the soft ticking of a nearby clock, we sometimes find ourselves glancing out the window or standing beneath a fading sunset, and something inside us stirs, something almost wordless, a gentle ache, a familiar pull from somewhere deep within. It's not just nostalgia, it's remembrance in its most tender form. It's the memory of running barefoot across a warm sidewalk. It's the way the light used to hit the tops of the trees just before the day exhaled. It's the feeling of leaning on your handlebars as your bike coasted downhill, your whole body trusting the wind to carry you. And when we see today's children sitting indoors, heads bent over screens, voices muffled through headphones, part of us wants to knock on the past like a door we used to enter every day. Part of us wants to whisper to them, "You don't know what you're missing." Not out of judgment, not with anger, but with the soft sorrow of someone who once held a secret joy and wants to share it before it slips too far away. Because what we had wasn't better in every way, it wasn't perfect, and it wasn't always easy, but it was real. It was visceral and direct and unsanitized. It gave us something to hold on to when life got complicated later on, something to return to when the world felt too loud or too cold. And in remembering that, we also remember how lucky we were. Lucky to grow up in a time when trust flowed more freely between neighbors, when the streets felt safer and the evenings stretched longer, when kids could be kids without anyone needing a calendar invite or a safety app. We were the last generation to roam that wide, unguarded world, to ride the edge of dusk without fear, to know our friends not by usernames, but by the way they laughed, or the way they always passed you the ball first, or the way they never tattled, even when you knew they should have. We hold that world inside us still, not as a perfect dream, but as a deeply human truth. And maybe, just maybe, if we share it often enough, if we tell the stories and keep the memories alive, we can pass a little piece of it on, not just to remind others, but to remind ourselves of who we were, and who, at our core, we still are. So here we are, at the end of another long memory, standing quietly at the edge of yesterday, where the echoes of our childhood still drift like warm summer air through the trees. And maybe you felt it too, that quiet tug in your chest, that little smile you didn't realize was there, that soft sting behind the eyes as you remembered something you hadn't thought about in years, the shape of a friend's face in the golden hour of play, the hum of a distant lawnmower, the smell of dust rising from a sun-warmed street, or the familiar creak of your old screen door as someone called you home. These weren't grand moments. They weren't polished or planned or preserved in photo albums. But they were real. And because they were real, they mattered. They became the foundation, the gentle, weathered bricks on which we built everything that came after. And now, as the world spins faster and faster, and the days feel more crowded with noise than ever before, it's more important than ever to pause, to sit with these memories, and to honor the lives we lived before the world changed. Because these stories aren't just about the past. They are part of us. They shape the way we love, the way we laugh, the way we raise our children and treat our neighbors and face the quiet moments alone. And as we grow older and the faces around us change, these memories, of riding home with skinned knees and full hearts, of dinnertime laughter and screen door goodnights, become not just a comfort, but a gift. A soft light we can carry into the twilight of our years. So thank you for walking with us, for remembering with us, for letting your heart open wide to the beauty of what once was. If this video touched you, even in a small way, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel for more journeys into the past, and tapping the bell so we can walk down these old roads together again. Until next time, take care of yourself, hold those memories close, and never forget, some of the best parts of who we are were born in the simplest days of our childhood. And they're still with us, even now.